eventually we are, sometimes without even knowing it, trying to take the wheel for everyone else in ways that become less helpful. You get to be somebody who is along for the ride and is there to be support and companionship, but not necessarily to have to take over. They're not really inviting you to take over. Am I sort of being a control freak, or am I actually being helpful as the expert in the room? We don't want them to be so dependent on us that they can't do it for themselves. We would say cognitively, I want them to grow, but our behavior sometimes indicates something totally different. This is episode 447 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. Let them take the wheel. Okay, y'all, fair warning that this episode is dropping 2 days after my son walks across a graduation stage for his high school graduation. So cut me a little slack today, especially because I am not going to make you sit through a rehash of a commencement speech. So you're welcome for that. Nor am I going to give you my own commencement thoughts in my own form of an address. I thought about it, but that does not feel like the right approach for this particular episode. But I have been sitting with something over these last few weeks as I've been parenting a senior that I think will resonate with you, whether or not you have kids, whether your kids are 4 years old or 40 years old. Because I think this particular insight really applies to us, whether we are leading teams, whether we are navigating relationships like marriages or friendships, or parenting for that matter. And I think it's because this pattern of behavior that I'm calling taking the wheel is really hardwired into those of us who are high performers, highly competent people. I think highly competent people are rewarded early on in our lives for being able to get things done. And being able to get things done eventually grows into being able to solve problems, right? To do more complicated things, you have to solve problems, see around corners, figure out solutions to things that aren't obvious at first. And that's kind of like a rush. It's really fun to do that. And because we're good at it and we get thanked for it and rewarded for it, it's like, for me, it feels like it starts spilling over. And it's like, well, I'll solve other people's problems too. I'll be so helpful. And that really is the pattern that I want to poke around in a little bit today, because eventually we are, sometimes without even knowing it, trying to take the wheel for everyone else in ways that become less helpful, right? For a long time, I just thought of this as like a service that I was providing, right? Sort of servant leadership. I thought this is what it looked like to be a good leader. You know, that old story, like virtually all of us were told, I think we were. If you grew up in the era I did, I'm Gen X, hardcore Gen X. I don't even get to border millennials, but that generation of leaders were raised on servant leadership. And the classic story was if the CEO wouldn't stop to pick up a piece of trash on the hallway, it was like leaving that for the janitor. That was abhorrent. You wanted every senior leader willing to do the job of anyone underneath them. And there's a place for it. It has merit to say, look, you got to be willing to roll up your sleeves and do some stuff. But I think it can get twisted a little bit and give us a license to do work that really is not ours to do. Right? To make decisions that are not ours to make. And that actually can take the knees out from under people that we are really trying to develop and grow. So I think that's what I want to dig into in this episode is because we are the person who got to where we are by being someone who figures stuff out, who sees a problem and maps out a solution and executes it, sometimes before anyone has even finished asking the question. That can go too far. And when it goes too far, it can have some costs largely to the people around us, and in some cases back to ourselves. Like when you bring that same wiring into your personal life, right? When you take that almost over capable nature into your personal life, Like you see someone struggling and your whole system activates because you already know the answer. You can see exactly what they should do. Everything in you wants to just like do it for them. And I mean that almost literally. If you have ever taught a teenager to drive, literally to drive a car, you know what I'm talking about. We are currently, our third child is learning to drive right now. She'll have her license this summer. So there is a moment when you are in the process of teaching. In fact, there are many moments, if I'm being honest, where your hands actually move to the wheel. Like you can't help yourself, right? Or your foot instinctively goes for that invisible brake on the passenger side that isn't there, but God, you wish it were in that moment. Everything in your body is saying, let me do this, because you are so sure that they're about to steer you like off the road or into another vehicle. And I think it's a great metaphor for the way we're operating in the rest of our life, right? When you think about being in the car teaching a child to drive, there are actually very few times where it is appropriate for you to reach over and grab the wheel. They do exist, right? If they really are going to steer off the road or they're not paying attention, there is a time when you don't want to put yourself in danger. You need to take the wheel. But that is not when, they're going a route that you wouldn't have chosen, but it will also get you there. You don't take the wheel at that point. You don't do it when the music is too loud. You don't do it when you could get there faster, right? You only do it when it actually really matters. Like it's kind of the success or failure is at stake. Then yes, you do it, but not just because it's easier for you or just because you know how to. And I think that applies to all the other areas of our life where we metaphorically take the wheel. Right? That same kind of line in the sand of like, is this disaster that's going to happen if I don't intervene? Or is this a preference? Right? Am I sort of being a control freak or am I actually being helpful as the like expert in the room? And that discernment, learning where is the difference, when is it appropriate for us to intervene or take the wheel and when is it not, is everything. And I think when we don't get good at the discernment and we use that same approach, we overuse it, we use it too often, then we get ourselves into a lot of trouble. And that's what I want to get into today. So the first thing I want to talk about is like, where are some places where you might see yourself in this pattern, right? Where are some places where it shows up in your life? Because once you see it, like you'll see it everywhere. If you're somebody who's prone to doing this, you will recognize this behavior in yourself in more than one area of your life. And this is worth saying, you may not be the person who does this. You might be the person this gets done to. So you might have a leader doing this to you, like a manager at work. You might have a spouse or partner, a good friend who is taking your wheel. And so you could listen to this episode through either lens. I am generally the person taking the wheel. So I'm kind of talking to myself here and coaching myself through this. So one area where you might see it is at work, right? There could be someone on your team, they probably report to you, where you know how to do their job. If you work in an organization, like I worked at Procter & Gamble for years and years, it is a promote from within organization. So often you had done the job of the people that you are now managing. And that is a very dangerous place because you are good at it. You got promoted because you were good at it. And you have somebody often reporting to you who has not done it as long. And therefore, they probably haven't developed the same level of competence. So it is extremely tempting in a situation like that to be like, I'll just do it, right? Just give it to me, get out of my way, I'll handle it. Anytime we're in a managerial relationship where we used to do that job, I think the tendency is the highest. And where is it a little easier? If you are managing cross-functionally. If as a senior leader at P&G, you're managing across peers. So you have finance and product supply, product development, those people could be reporting to you. You may never have done those jobs. It's less likely that you're going to take the wheel in a situation like that. If you go to work for a company in a different industry and you don't have experience in that industry, it might be easier to bridle yourself. But especially if you are in a situation where you know how to do their job and you got promoted because of it, you're going to be very tempted to do this. And the problem is then the person who is in that actual role never gets to develop. They never get to hold the tension of solving a problem because you're jumping in to solve it for them. Now, there's an edge here, right? Sometimes you want to model what excellence looks like. You want to show them what you can do. right? You want to get them out of a difficult situation or put a finishing touch on something. That's different. I'm talking more about, are you actually like jumping in and micromanaging the whole project, or literally saying, you know what, never mind, I'll just do it. That's what we want to watch out for, because the person who's in that role never gets a chance to grow their skills if you are jumping in and doing the hardest parts all the time. And it has costs that, I think really matter over time. When this everyone will tolerate it once, but when it's happening over and over again over time, I think it can become a really destructive pattern at work. You might see this happening in your relationship, in your marriage or a partnership. Think about how often we're saying they didn't do it right? They're just not doing it right. And so I'm going to do it. Classic example, like memeable example, is loading the dishwasher. Everybody thinks their way of loading the dishwasher is the right way. My way is actually the right way. Just kidding. But everyone thinks their way of doing it is the right way, and that therefore anything different from that is wrong. And that's where we'll be like, you know what, get out of the way. I'll just do it. Okay. It could be, think about all the things in your household that you have a particular way you like to do it, and you think it gives you the best result or it's the most efficient. And when you see somebody doing it differently than that, it's so tempting to just jump in there and be like, you know what, I'll just do it. Never mind. Right? You sort of dismiss them from the room. That is an irritant to that relationship. It's like a little pebble in their shoe. It's frustrating to know that every time they're going to try to do it, you're going to come in and say, don't do it that way. Right? And what happens over time is they will quit trying. They will just stop doing it. Be like, you load the dishwasher then. You're the only one who knows how to do it. And that's not what we really want, right? Because that's going to create one of these problems associated with this pattern of behavior, which is overload. You are going to get overloaded. That work is going to come right back to you if you're constantly jumping in and correcting somebody else's way of doing it. Because they'll just hand it over and then it's your job forever. And that is probably not ideal, especially when somewhere in your mind, you trained them to do that, right? You created that situation, you trained them to do it quite by accident, but you're like, I can see how my behavior is what led us to this situation. And I think if you see it at work and you see it in your romantic relationship, you probably will also see it in your friendships or other peer-to-peer relationships. Like, you will probably be the person where people come to you to tell you about something that's going on in their life, and you give them advice. And they're really not looking for your advice. They're looking to tell you about something difficult happening in their life, right? So people who are problem solvers, everything looks like a problem and they're ready to solve it. It's an addiction to solving the problem. So if you have been given that feedback by friends or family members who are like, I just need you to listen. I don't need you to solve my problem. If you are this highly capable person who is probably paid in your workplace to solve problems, it is very hard to turn that off, to kind of put that capability in your pocket and say, that's not what's needed right now. And again, if it shows up for friends, it's probably showing up with your children. Like, are you good at just staying in the proverbial passenger seat, taking a little bit more of a passive role, letting somebody else be in charge? And I'm speaking directly to the listeners who are wired like that today, or who are living with or working for someone who is. Because I think we have empathy to develop on both sides here, and we need to have a little bit of vocabulary around, if you are the person who is constantly like basically having the wheel taken from you, right? You're on the receiving side of this. You want to have some language for how can you reset expectations. Something as simple as like, hey, I just need you to listen. I've got this, right? Or, hey, I don't need a solution today. I just needed to talk about it. That kind of language can sort of be the signal to the person who's wired more like me to just stand down. Like, you got to shift into a different gear, and it actually takes some pressure off because you don't feel compelled to solve the problem. You just kind of get to, you get to be a supporter. You get to be somebody who is along for the ride and is there to be support and companionship, but not necessarily to have to take over. They're not really inviting you to take over. Again, could be in a relationship, could be at work, could be in a parenting situation. if it shows up in one place for you, it is probably going to show up everywhere. So what is the cost of that? Right? If you stay in this habit of behavior, there are a few things that happen, and they happen kind of quickly, right? The first thing is the people in the driver's seat don't get to grow. They don't get to build skills. They don't get to learn how to get themselves out of these situations. They don't get to practice different approaches because you're constantly taking over. And it's like, well, that opportunity just got pulled out from under them. And none of us really want that, right? We don't want them to be so dependent on us that they can't do it for themselves. We would say cognitively, I want them to grow, but our behavior sometimes indicates something totally different. Really think about if you're somebody who's motivated by kind of an altruistic lens, you would look at this through what it's not good for them. So I want to make it better for them. I want to give them a chance to build skills. You're going to have to stand down. I think what's the problem for you if you're the person taking the wheel is you're going to get overloaded. You are just going to keep saying, I got it. I'll handle it. I'll take this one. I'll do that. And you're going to look down at your list and be like, where did all my time go? I am so overcommitted now. I have made it my job to do everybody else's job because I think I'm being helpful. I think I'm being a servant leader. I think I'm going to increase the quality level. And at the end of the day, we're just tired little puppies who took on too much, right? So we got to practice this skill of just taking our hands off the wheel and saying, I am here for you if you need me, right? Ask me if you're stuck. I'll help, but not like rushing in there before we've even been invited. I think it's a real cost to us when we look at that overload that I know so many of you listening experience this all the time. You're like, I have too much to do and not enough time to do it. How much of that is actually your work? And how much of it is because you haven't yet learned how to let other people do their work while you do yours, right? It's a fine line sometimes. And I also think that there is a relationship cost to this. I think there's a relationship cost when people stop feeling the desire to connect with us. They don't want to tell us stuff because we're going to solve their problem. And if they know that that's not what they're looking for, maybe they're not ready to solve the problem and implement a solution. Maybe they just want to think about it and let it be their way, then we really can erode connection. The problem solvers aren't always the people who get to experience the strongest connection. And I think that if you are in that seat of always feeling like, oh my gosh, every time my phone rings, somebody has a problem, and the kind of unsaid part is, and therefore I have to solve it, ask yourself, is that even true? Because it might just be that they want to connect. They want to feel supported. They want to feel heard, and you don't have to solve it, right? We're taking away their opportunity to solve that problem and feel the satisfaction of having solved it, right? And there's one more cost that I've just started thinking about as I was putting this episode together. And it's really that when you are always the one solving someone else's problem, you're taking the wheel, you're like intervening in everybody else's life, guess what you're probably never doing? You're probably never getting to feel that support yourself, right? Think about this. If your default is every interaction I'm in, I'm the one who's supposed to handle it. Whether I originated the problem or not, every interaction I have in my life, I'm supposed to handle it. When are you ever getting to be the person who is supported? When do you ever get to be the person who is receiving that guidance, right? You can't always be on that side of the equation. You want to feel what it's like when somebody stays in the passenger seat for you, right? When you're at the wheel in your life and you're like, this is what it feels like to have someone say, I believe in you. To have someone say, I know you've got this, right? That's like where we learn it. So if you didn't have that, if the model you had was somebody who was always jumping in and solving problems for you, then you may just think, well, it's my turn now. That's what I'm supposed to do. But the reality is it is so deeply powerful to be supported by someone who says, I know you've got this. I know you can figure this out. That was a great try. What do you think you learned from it? What are you going to do next time? Like really coaching, that kind of coaching approach is so powerful. So, you know, that's what I'm doing in the coaching circle. If you've been around a minute, I've been talking about this now for a few weeks. That's the dynamic, right? It's not a place where we hand you the answers. It's a place where you are supported and have tools while you work to find your own. And my job is to believe in you, to give you some tools, to answer questions when you have them, when you're asking, like, hey, can you help me think this through? Of course, but you do the driving, right? You get to stay in the driver's seat of your own life. And so, that's always available to you here to check out. It's our website's at brilliant-balance.com/coaching circle. That's where that lives. But I think it applies in all areas of life. And so I'll leave you with this. The most confident people in your life, the people who seem like they are fully themselves, they're clear on where they're going, they exude confidence in their own ability to like see around corners, solve problems for themselves. I bet you that they have had someone in their corner who believed in them before they believed in themselves, who, stayed in the car but didn't grab the wheel, who like let them learn how to solve problems and make decisions, because ultimately that practice is what builds confident, capable people. So that's what you want to be for the people in your life, right? And that's what you want to have for yourself. Like that's you get to take your turn in the driver's seat and you get to take your turn in the passenger seat. And I want you to go be that person for people in your life and then find it for yourself. I will see you next week. Till next time, let's be brilliant.